Do you know what's supposed to be really nice? Frozen Jaffa cakes.
No.
I have not tried it, but I went on a training day and a woman told us about it there, and quite a few people were aware of this and said, yeah, it's great. So I think I need to try frozen Jaffa cakes.
Can you and let me know?
Yeah,
Because
I
I'm
can.
intrigued. I would never. Who discovered that? Who thought I'm going to put my Jaffa cake in the freezer?
I reckon it was someone that meant to put it in the fridge and accidentally put it in the freezer and then went, oh, this has actually worked. It's quite
This was a
nice.
pleasant mistake.
At one point, I would have never eaten a Jaffa cake.
Love that. Discreet
That was a
intro.
smooth segue, wasn't it? And
Yeah.
why is that, Katie?
You were restricting, Becca.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Restriction.
Quite a complex topic that I'm going to say tackle, but we're not really going to tackle it because of the complexity of it. We're just going to have a chat.
I was thinking about that before this recording. This is a huge topic.
Mm.
And just a disclaimer to the listeners, we're not going to be able to cover everything in this, 45, 50 minutes. So I guess we could start with what is restriction? We think that's important for us to clarify before we
Mhm.
talk about our experiences of it.
Yes.
Katie, do you want to take it away?
I knew you were going to do that.
You usually do it to me, so I got in there
I
first this
know.
time.
I know. It takes me a while to warm up. What is restriction? It's quite a big question, Becca.
Yeah,
And I'm assuming we're talking about physical restriction,
that's a good point.
or are
There
we
is two
talking about
types of
mental
restriction.
restriction? Do you think we should stick to one?
I think it's important to clarify what the difference is between mental restriction and physical
Hmm.
restriction.
Yeah.
Maybe today we will focus more on physical restriction,
Mm.
but then we can talk about mental restriction in a bit more detail in another episode. 'Cause I'm
Yeah.
sure that'll be helpful for other people.
Yeah.
Um, but what would you say? How would you describe the difference between the two?
Physical restriction is restricting your food intake. I think it's actually something that I didn't realize until I started recovery is that you could be restricting and not necessarily realize you're restricting in terms of a physical sense because you may think you know how much food your body needs, but it's going to have its own idea of what it needs. And I think physical restriction can look like calorie restriction, and it could also look like restricting food groups, limiting carbohydrates and fats. It's fundamentally depriving your body of what it needs, really, is the physical side of things. Would you agree with that,
Yeah,
Becca?
100%. I would agree with that. I would also add to that restriction can also come in the form of fasting as well. So it can be
Hmm.
not eating for significant periods of time.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm not talking about fasting as a religious practice,
Yeah.
but more out of a form of weight maintenance or weight loss and weight control in some way. So I would add that in there as restriction. And similarly to you said that it can be easy for people to not realize they're restricting. I think it's really important to highlight that you can be physically restricting your food intake and be living in a larger body as well. You do not have to be quote unquote underweight to be experiencing physical or mental food restriction.
Absolutely. I'm glad you said that because that's really important. I think that's a really important piece. You perhaps feel like you should be losing weight, like you have weight that you need to lose, that perhaps physical restriction feels like your duty. In terms of mental restriction,
Mm-hmm.
that's a tricky one, isn't it? That is something I had no clue about until I started recovery myself. So you've got the moralizing of your food choices, thinking you are good for having something versus bad for having another thing. You have shoulding around food, feeling like you shouldn't be eating certain foods or eating in a certain way, as well as like the negative self talk around your food choices, that guilt that comes after food, and internalizing that. I think that takes it to a whole new level, doesn't it?
I think what you say there around the way you talk to yourself around food I think that's a really important way of recognizing mental restriction, because it can be harder to recognize than physical
Mm.
restriction. So I think phrases like, oh, I shouldn't eat this, or I've been naughty for eating that, or I've overeaten, or I've eaten too much today, like all of these things, that is part of the mental restriction, because underlying it is the belief that you should have eaten less.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
the restrictive mentality is still there.
Yeah. When you're looking at giving yourself permission to eat, but it feels conditional by way of saying things like, oh, I can have a cookie, but like when there's a
Mm.
limitation on it as well, that is something that I see quite a lot and I very much used to do.
Mm.
I was like, no, I'm allowed chocolate, knowing in the back of my head, yeah, you can have it, but there's a condition to it, whether that's a limit or having to somehow make up for it. It wasn't full unconditional permission.
So there's still a limit on it, which
Mm.
suggests there's a restrictive mentality.
Yeah.
I think if anyone is living with strong diet rules or beliefs around how you should eat or shouldn't eat, then there is some restriction there. Maybe the physical restriction isn't there because you're not listening to these rules, but if those rules are still existing, then there is still
Hmm.
that mental piece going on.
Yeah. I think that you're absolutely right. I think it speaks to the psychological piece of this that often gets not even dismissed, but a lot of people don't even realize the impact of the way that you think about food and the way that you think about yourself around your food choices, the impact that has on your body and how it's perceived the same way as physical restriction, which is why you can be binging every day but still be restricting if you have the mental restriction as a component.
If you are restricting every single day, then the likelihood of you binging is going to increase as well. They
Yes,
go
the
quite hand in hand, don't they?
binge restrict cycle that a lot of us are very familiar with.
I think during recovery, physical restriction and mental restriction show up at different stages.
Hmm.
And I don't want to speak for everyone, but in my experience, first it looked like working on the physical restriction.
Hmm.
And then later down the line in recovery, it was about tackling the mental restriction piece. That might not
Yeah.
be how it works for everyone, but that's how it looked for me.
Yeah, I definitely had the same experience. The first piece to look at was the physical restriction, getting regular meals, you're not going too far in between eating.
If you're physically hungry because you are physically restricting, then it's very hard to do the mental restriction piece, because biologically your body is craving food. It's hungry.
Yes.
Like you will be
Yes.
fighting against your body's biology. And then you're always going to lose against it, because that part of your brain, your like primal brain that wants you to have food for survival, is going to jump in and it's going to override the front part of your brain, which is where more of the mental restriction is, because that's around like your beliefs and your decision making. And so it's a losing battle. So you need to work.
Yes.
That's why if you look at a lot of binge eating recovery programs, a lot of them will start with um, getting regular meal times in so you
Yeah.
can address the physiology. So I say physiology. I always struggle with
Yes.
that word. So you can address the physiology so you're
Hmm.
not going to have to be in a battle with your primal hunger.
Yes. I think the hunger has to be addressed first for a lot of us. And also touching on what you said earlier, that you can be in a larger body and still need to address that hunger. Just because you are in a larger body does not mean that your body is not hungry. That is still what I think for a lot of us is necessary. Because the body knows, the body remembers the periods of time where food has been deprived. It doesn't forget that. That's why we get stuck in these cycles. And that's why a lot of people, and I felt the same, and I hear it with clients where it's, but I had it. Like I was doing really well, and then something happened, and now I can't get back there. It's like there's a reason you can't get back there. Your body remembers that and it
Mhm.
stores that, it's coded in, and it's not just going to ignore that. So you're going to
Yeah.
keep running up against it. So your body needs to be shown that it can trust that food is available through regular eating. And also that process in and of itself, I don't know whether what it was like for you, Becca, but it takes longer than you think it does. Like it took me
Yeah.
longer than I thought it would. I felt like I was eating a lot of food. I was like,
Hmm.
shouldn't I be done now? And it took longer than I thought it should before I felt I didn't feel so much urgency around food. Like I could tell that my body was starting to feel calmer.
Yeah. Yeah. I've heard some people share their experiences of working on that physical hunger
Mm.
and saying that it took them maybe 3 months to feel established with that. For me, it took me longer. I would say it took me probably 6 to 8 months.
Hmm.
And then even after that 8 months, it was probably a good year before I really started to feel my hunger and fullness sort of signals back
Hmm.
in a secure way. But I feel like that's going off into something else there around hunger and fullness. But yeah, it can take
Yeah.
quite a long time to work through physical
Hmm.
restriction. So if you're there and you're feeling like, why do I not feel I'm secure in this yet? Just be reassured that you're not alone in that. It can take a while.
Yeah. But still, to this day, like now that I am settled and have been for a while, I still eat more than I thought I would. So I think that's something that needs to be challenged. Ignore that. My brain's gone. I'm going to wipe that bit out.
No, I think it's a valid point to make because I would class myself as someone that has a hearty appetite. Like,
Yes.
I need big meals to feel satisfied. And
Yeah.
compared to a lot of people in my life, I do eat more than them. Whether that's just me or whether that's
Mhm.
because I have been through the process of having an eating disorder and then recovered from it, and therefore my body needs more. I'm not quite sure.
Mm.
But I wonder if that, as someone who identifies as a woman, whether that the fact that I have a hearty appetite is something that contributed to me restricting. Because
Mhm.
if we look at diet culture and how it expects women to eat, and what we see portrayed a lot in the media is that women eat smaller
Mm.
portions,
Yeah.
and that's just not always the case.
Mm.
But if you're conditioned to think like that and you have a hearty appetite as a woman, then you feel like you're doing something wrong or you're
Yeah.
not feminine enough. And that can lead to wanting to restrict.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. I think there is that messaging that as a female, we should just be able to live on very little food and be okay with that. I remember receiving the messaging and feeling like I shouldn't really care about food. I shouldn't really be that bothered about it. I shouldn't really pay much attention to it. I should just be able to, I don't know, it was like this airy fairy vibe around it of not needing it. And so a lot of my eating disorder was continuously fighting my appetite because I was so scared of it. I think my appetite, it felt like it would never end, to be honest. And I think that speaks to many things that we will not explore today. I did want to just speak to what you said about the appetite and agree with you that, yes, there is something about as a female feeling like we have to eat less than our partners, or because I don't know whether have you seen some of the videos? I don't know whether they're on TikTok or what, about talking about girls who will only if their boyfriend eats first, like that kind of thing. If you go out for dinner and I
I
just
don't have
find that
TikTok.
so, no, neither do I, but I have seen them on Instagram. But that again, continuing this messaging that women actually don't feel comfortable eating unless someone else is eating as well.
Yeah. There's a movie. I don't know if you know the movie White Chicks. And
Yes.
I love this movie growing up. I thought it was really funny. But there's a clip in it where one of the women, it's a man dressed as a woman because of
Other
something that
things.
happened in the movie earlier. Yeah. But anyway, and she goes on a date with this man who genuinely
Yes.
thinks that she is a woman. Um, and he says at the dinner table, oh, and for the woman, perhaps a salad.
Yes.
And I really remember this. And this woman or this man dressed as a woman is like, no, and
Yeah,
orders like a
perhaps
burger and
not.
fries and a side of onion drinks and all onion rings and all of that stuff. And I don't know why, but that really stuck with me because it made me feel really. I know this wasn't actually a woman; it was a man dressed as a woman. But it made me. I don't know when I watched it, think, yeah, it's all right. We don't have to eat a salad, you
Yeah,
know?
absolutely. We're hungry. We're really hungry.
Yeah. So, what do you think? What do you think? We've touched on it a little bit there around
Mm.
appetite and as a woman, but what do you think contributes to physical restriction? What reasons would somebody physically restrict, or why did you physically restrict in your experience?
So I was thinking about this earlier. I don't know about you, but sometimes when I look back, it feels a bit blurry. But I remember my first experience of physical restriction was actually because I was unwell. Like I had a flu virus and I didn't eat. And then I noticed my clothes were looser as a result of not eating for a period of time. And that was the first time I made the connection between eating less means that my body changes. That was the first time I'd really gauged that. And I remember feeling quite like smug about it, feeling like I discovered something that no one else knew about, even though that's absolutely
Mm,
not the case. But it latched on in that moment. There was something about feeling like I could control my body that really felt powerful to me. I had that feeling of superiority with the physical
mm,
restriction. And it very quickly spiraled from missing breakfast to then came in the calorie counting and sticking to numbers. I threw myself into obsessively counting meals and calories because there was something about numbers that felt, they don't lie. They felt very safe. It felt very methodical for me. That was good for my brain. And I think because at that point in my life, I had other health issues and I was so anxious. I didn't realize it at the time, but in school, it was just debilitating. This was something that I could put my brain on, I could focus in on, and it was mine and it was in my own little bubble. I would be very aware that everyone else was eating and feel incredibly powerful that I wasn't eating. That was my first experience with physical restriction, and it spiraled very quickly from that moment. From, okay, now I want to eat as little as I can. It went very extreme quite quickly because there was this high that I would get from physically restricting. And when I look back now with the knowledge and information that I have now through recovery and the work I've done, for me, I knew my body was hungry and I knew it needed food, and saying, no, I'm not giving it to you. I think what I was doing is I was using the restriction as a way of translating
mm.
pain that I had and I felt towards myself. I was using hunger as a way of translating that.
It sounds like because you didn't like your body at the
Mm.
time, but you could feel it was hungry, being able to say no was like a pushback against it. I don't know, like a
Yeah,
punishment because
yeah,
you didn't. I don't know if that's
yeah.
right, but that's what
That's
it sounded
exactly it.
like.
Like, oh, are you hungry? Yeah, no, I'm not going to feed you. You can
Mm,
suffer, you can wait, which I think just really speaks to that complete disconnect I had between me and my
hmm.
body. It was two separate things.
Yeah.
Um,
It's interesting you say that because when I was thinking as well about some of the things that contribute to my restriction, there was a piece around a disconnection to my body as well, but it was in a different way to what you're describing. And I feel that this was really tied into the trauma, like the sexual trauma that I experienced. And I felt like kind of what happened from the sexual trauma is my brain and my body became very like disconnected from each other. And when I ate food, that would bring me into my body because I could feel how it felt in my body. And it made me just very aware of my body, which was something that I didn't like at the time because
mm,
I had created this disconnect. So that awareness in my body when I ate also brought a lot of emotions. It brought a lot of
mm,
emotions about my body and like the disgust I felt for my body. And those emotions, some were about my body and some were just about myself and the experience. All of those emotions felt really overwhelming and I didn't know what to do with them. So what I would do is at this point, I was very much in bulimia. I would purge through self-induced vomiting. And at the time, that felt like what I wasn't just purging the food, but I was purging all of those emotions and that connection to my body that I didn't want to feel. And
Mm,
all of that was being released. And then I would restrict
mm.
to avoid feeling that, to avoid feeling connected to my body and all of the emotional overwhelm that came from it. And by restricting, I was able to continue that kind of
Yeah.
dissociation and that detachment from my body and all the emotions. So it feels like similar to what you're describing with
Mm.
not
Yeah.
liking your body or not wanting to be in your body,
Yes.
but in slightly a different way. And
Yeah.
that for me was very much a trauma response.
I relate to the way that you speak about like just the stress of just being in your body. That
Mhm.
really lands for me. That was exasperated when everything went the other way and the
Mm.
binge eating started because as a result there was weight gain. And so I was experiencing my body in a different way. But there is actually, no, I'm not going to say that. I was going to talk about trauma. I don't want to talk about trauma. We don't want to go there.
I've gone there.
I know, but I feel like if I go there, it's being like, yeah, me too. Do you know what I
Why
mean?
not? Let's like normalize being able to talk about it.
Because I, it's the way you use the
You
word.
don't have to though. Sorry, I obviously don't want
No,
you
no,
to feel
you're fine. No,
uncomfortable.
no, you're fine. I can always get rid of it if I don't want to say it anyway. There's that word disgust. It's such a
Hmm.
strong word to use when you're describing your body. And that always felt like a word I lent on. And
Hmm.
I remember when people would be like, oh, I don't like this and I don't like that. I'm like, no, no, this is disgust. The very fact that I'm in my skin feels too much. And I do think a huge part of that speaks to trauma. And I think that is the disconnect from your body. For me, there was a blame of my body for
Hmm.
being what I believed the cause of such. But yeah, feeling such heavy things about your body, it's quite, when I think about it now, I don't know whether you think the same. I don't necessarily look back and I'm like, oh, poor me. But I do look back and I think, God, that's really, that's a lot. That's a lot to feel at quite a young age. No wonder it manifested in disordered eating.
When I look back and think about that word disgust that you use around your body, for me, that I think that really speaks to just how low someone's self-worth can get if you genuinely disgust
Mm-hmm.
being in your body. Because disgust is a very strong word. To put your body in the same category as other things that you might class as disgusting really speaks to
Mm.
having such a little sense of self-worth, doesn't it? I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Which, of course, I really didn't see at the time.
Yeah. Another thing I thought when it comes to like why we restrict, I thought now this is where I might get a little bit messy because I'm trying to put this out in a clear way.
You can get
So
messy here, you're allowed.
bear with me. I think when we look at why we restrict, we need to look at what beliefs have we developed about ourselves and where do they come from? As in, do, what past scenarios or messages did we get that made us develop those belief systems? This is often when we're younger in childhood, right? But then this is where it gets complicated and very complex because it's not just about those beliefs and where we got them from, but then also what other kind of environmental factors or life experiences come in to add to that.
Mm-hmm.
And also what kind of to what extent is there some personality traits as well that are in there so that
Mm-hmm.
you can see that you get all these layers built up on like childhood experiences, beliefs, environmental factors, experiences, personality traits. Wow, this gets complicated when we
Yeah.
look at why we restrict. So to try and make this a little bit clearer, I was trying to think of an example for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I from a very young age, I got a lot of messaging from influential people in my family around the importance of my body as a woman. And one in particular I remember being told was it's important for me to be slim as a woman and to look good as a woman. Look good meaning slim, which I don't agree with now, that they're not synonymous. But that was the messaging because as a man, it didn't matter if I was fat or ugly. I could use my humor to get by in life, or I could use my intelligence to get by in life. But as a woman, I couldn't. I had to be slim. And I'm not even saying this was implicit messaging. This was explicitly told, like explicitly, those direct words. So that made me develop a belief that
Mm-hmm.
my value is in my body. So there's the belief and the experience that led to that belief. But then we add in like other environmental factors, like the diet culture
Mm-hmm.
world that we live in and all of the messages that has around dieting and 500 calorie diets, 1200 calorie diets, all that sort of stuff, and portion sizes. And this adds in the idea that if you can't sustain that or meet those calorie restrictions, then you are a failure.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that hard to do. And I would fall into binge eating cycles. And that binging then told me I'm a failure. And then that led to another belief of I'm not good enough because if
Yeah.
I can't follow those dietary rules because I'm binging, then I'm not good enough. And if I'm not good enough, then what am I? Because if everything all of my value is put in my body, then what am I? So then that led to I need to try harder. So I need to
Mm.
restrict more, basically.
Yeah.
That's what my brain said. Now that absolutely wasn't the solution, but that's what I thought I needed to do was to try harder by restricting more so I wouldn't be a failure when it came to meeting those
Mm.
dietary rules. But then there is other life experiences that come in, things like the trauma. So I feel like going through my parents' divorce and then the sexual trauma, like so soon afterwards, that period of time really created a lack of self-trust. So I felt like I had quite a distorted sense of self-judgment because of those situations.
Yeah.
And then that added another level because when I was trying to follow all of these diets and track everything, I didn't even trust I was following them, quote unquote, correctly.
Mm.
Because I remember I would fill in like my fitness pal to try and follow this calorie limit that I put on for myself. And I didn't even trust that I was accurately logging what I was logging and the calorie intake that I was putting in there was accurate. I felt I need to restrict more to make sure that I am at least falling within that amount because I could be putting this in for X amount of calories, but that might not be
Mm-hmm.
right. So I would always add calories onto it. When I was tracking it, it looked like I'd eaten more because I didn't trust myself. And that ties into that's connected to the trauma of the lack of self-trust. Does
Yeah.
this make sense? Are you
Yeah.
following me? Because
I
I
am
feel like this is
following
very
you.
complicated.
I'm waiting for the messy bit because I'm following.
Okay, thanks. Um, so I feel like that also tied into this feeling of I don't want to fail because if I don't fail, then I'm not good enough, and then what am I? Because my
Mm-hmm.
body
Mm-hmm.
is my main thing. And then another piece to add into this is perfectionism. Like
Oh
I
yeah.
have perfectionism. I have perfectionistic tendencies.
Mm-hmm.
I've done a lot of work to try and be less perfectionistic. And
Yeah.
I would say I am less perfectionistic, but it is still a personality trait I have to be conscious of. And
Yeah.
then that adds another level to why I might restrict
Mm.
because perfectionism loves to attach to rules and it likes to attach to things that are right or wrong. It likes to attach
Mm-hmm.
to societal's expectations and pressures because then if you can fulfill them, then you are quote unquote perfect in the eyes of other
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
So that was another. level to add into there, and my body became this tool to put all those perfectionistic tendencies onto him. So what I'm trying to say is these might not be your experiences if you're listening. You might not have the exact same belief systems and experiences, but I think that's a quite a helpful framework to think about why am I restricting by looking at it in that step-by-step process.
Yeah.
And it is very complex, and
Yeah.
there is lots of layers to it. And I don't think you can unpick all of them at once, but I think just having an understanding of those different factors that might be contributing to why we restrict is really helpful.
Yeah.
So hopefully that made sense.
It made perfect sense. It is, you're exactly right. I think it's paramount to actually really delve into, okay, what messaging have I received? Because also we perhaps, although it's a process for sure, like we have far more power and control over what we choose to believe and what we take on as truth than we think we do. And that
Mhm,
was a really empowering part of recovery for me, which definitely came much later, of being like, I don't have to buy into this. I
mhm,
actually don't. I actually can say no. I'm not going to continue this narrative that I have to look a certain way in order to
mhm,
receive XYZ. I get to decide for myself. No. That's
mhm,
not to say that always feels secure, because human being, and it can at times feel like you're going against the tide.
mhm,
But it is so much untangling these beliefs that for a lot of people, I know for me as well, didn't really realize they were there. Probably because they are normalized. But when I'd come out of treatment for anorexia and put on weight quite quickly, I'd had therapy for a while and I was a bit like, I don't want it anymore. Leave me alone. I don't want to talk about it. But I went the whole other way with the binging. And I remember feeling such shame about my appetite. I grew up in an environment where my mum gave up dieting when I was quite young. So I have very few memories of her sitting down with us for dinner and not eating or
mhm,
having something different. It was mainly my dad that dieted. So I don't necessarily recall a lot of commentary about what I was eating, but that shame was definitely there. And I think it was linked to the trauma and just the shame of, very much similar to what you said, of like feeling like I just kept needing food and filling myself up, and how the visceral reaction of that. But a thing for me was very much this belief that, firstly, I believed my body should look a certain way. I thought that I'd done something wrong and that had resulted in my body looking the way it looked. So it seemed like my obligation was to rectify the problem that was my body. And I was very much in that, in the 90s, of stick thin was the look. And I
mhm.
think you were probably the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I need to say this before I forget because I know what my brain is. If I don't say it now, it will go. But what you said there around, it was something about needs, and you said you didn't want to, it felt wrong for your body to need food. So
Yes.
you restricted because you didn't think it was right to have that need.
Yeah.
That made me think about a bigger piece of what restriction could be about.
Yeah.
Ooh, all right. I don't know if you heard that, but I just smacked. I got excited and I smacked the radiator.
I love the enthusiasm. That's what we need here.
This is a bigger piece around needs because
Yes.
you are restricting your
Mm-hmm.
food because you
Mm-hmm.
feel like the amount of food you need is too much. I would be inclined to ask, where else are you limiting yourself or suppressing your needs? Where else do you feel like you need too much and you don't allow yourself to get that because you think that you're being too needy? So is that from like a partner? Is that in terms of work, or is it in friendships where you feel like you have needs and you're not allowing them to be met because it's too much? Because what you do with food can sometimes actually then translate into how you do other things in life.
And this is your daily therapy session with Becca. I love. Do you know what I loved about that? Sorry,
How
I'm gonna
excited I
say,
got.
even though it's good. Yeah, I was like, you could see it in your face. You were like, oh, this is amazing. You were so enthusiastic. And yes, you are exactly right. It didn't feel safe to have needs. For me, went hand in hand with feeling like I was too much and that
Mm,
I needed too much. And that was just way too scary. So there was something about restricting that felt like I was shrinking myself, but shrinking my needs. And I want for nothing. Don't even see me. I'm not even here. It really was my way of trying to be invisible, feeling like, and I may delete this because this may feel like a little bit too much, but I remember thinking something's not right here because I feel like I could weigh 2 pounds and I'd still think that was too much. This is
Mhm.
really needing to go in myself that I felt so deeply. And restriction
Mhm.
was the best way for me to, I say the best, restriction was the only way for me to actually translate that.
And that shows, doesn't it, that it wasn't about
No,
your body size.
no.
Yes, it was very much real how it felt in the
Mm.
body, but it
Mm.
wasn't actually about the body because regardless of how you looked, whatever size you were, you would have still felt too much. So it was
Yeah,
bigger than
yeah,
just the body.
yeah. It was the belief I had about myself, my perception of myself, and really at the baseline, just not feeling safe in my body. My body did not feel like a safe place for me to be. And I do just want to say that a lot of this is in hindsight. I did not realize
Mm.
this was going on at the time. I was very much just living it. And of course, the binging, which I think started as a result of the restriction that had gone on for a while, added a whole nother layer for me because it felt like my body was so against me. It's like the binging just came up and was like, no, not anymore, and just took over. But yes, because this episode
Yeah,
is about restriction, I will say we will talk about that another time. But absolutely, in terms of it being far more than just I don't like my body.
yeah. Do you know what that made me think of earlier when you said when your body was hungry, your response was, "Oh, you want food? I'm not going to give you it." And it was like this punishment. It was like this battle.
Yes.
And then in
Yes.
response to that, the binge is, "Oh, okay, you're going to suppress us? Watch us."
Yeah.
It's like this
Yes.
fight.
Yeah. It is. I had these two parts,
Mhm.
and it was this constant back and forth.
Yeah. What you said there about it wasn't about your body, but your body was a way of putting these feelings onto it. That feels relatable for me because I got told a lot at the time. I may have mentioned this in our first episode, I'm not sure, that the reason I was restricting and I was having food issues in the way was because I was trying to gain control as a result of the trauma I'd experienced.
Mm.
And if that's how it feels for someone, then I think that's absolutely valid. And I think it makes sense. But I always, and still to this day, have an issue with this because that's not how it felt for me. It didn't feel like I was restricting my food intake and trying to control my body to just generally try and gain control. That's not what it felt like for me. And there was something, and this might be a me issue, probably is, but this idea of control, I felt like it feeds into that neurotic control freak stereotype that there
Mm.
can be around people who have anorexia.
Yes.
And I just rejected that because I'm like, I don't feel like a neurotic kind of control freak person. Don't put that label on me. And this is not how it feels like
Yeah.
for me in my lived experience. But what I think it was, those experiences and how I felt about those experiences was too painful to feel and to process. And it didn't feel safe to process those feelings. And I did feel a bit helpless in how to navigate them, that it was more me displacing that onto my
Yeah.
body. Some people might think that sounds the same as trying to gain
Mm.
control, but it didn't feel like that. It felt more, okay, I don't know how to deal with all of this. So I'm going to put it onto my body because that
Mm-hmm.
feels like a way that I actually do know how to process it and deal with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was more of a redirection, an easier target to put things than trying to regain control. And I think that's really helpful to recognize because that still shows up at times. So,
Mm.
for example, I will notice when my inner critic starts to talk negatively about my body or my
Mm.
weight, that's a signal for me. Okay, I'm feeling overwhelmed about something, or I'm feeling emotions about something somewhere in my life. And because I have that awareness now, it doesn't lead to restriction or disordered eating behaviors. I then get curious about what actually is going on.
Yeah.
But it's basically the same thing, but on a smaller scale to what I was experiencing as a result of the trauma. And
Yes.
that's why it didn't feel like it was about control.
Yes.
That makes sense.
Yes. I felt the same. It didn't feel
Hmm.
like control. And because it was not long after my parents' divorce, there was the push to make that the reason. Oh, your parents are
Hmm.
divorced, your world changed. Da, da, da. And I remember continuously saying to people, like, no, it has nothing to do with that. That doesn't even play a part here. This isn't about that. This was how I felt about myself. And I think because of the trauma, I felt betrayed and I felt anger. What you said, didn't know what to do with that, couldn't even name it at the time, didn't even understand what was going on. And I internalized that. And the easiest way for me to manage that was to make myself this problem, really just attack myself, go in on myself with this, because I had no other way of coping with what I was feeling. And of course, because what I was feeling was such heavy emotions that don't necessarily feel safe to be with anyway. Restriction and eventually binging, just, it's like they filled that gap for me.
Mm.
As you say, it put it somewhere that I felt I could manage better.
Hmm.
I notice more now a sudden drop in my body image. I feel more bothered about my body than I normally
Hmm.
am. That I know is a signal. What else is going on here? Because you're
Hmm.
trying to put it on your body because that's what you've always done. But we know
Yeah.
that that's not really the problem. And it's not necessarily about fixing what's bothering you, but sometimes you just need to name it for yourself. But it is, sometimes it's easier to put it on our body.
Yeah. Feels easier temporarily. I would say
The
long term, it's
illusion,
not.
it gives you
It's
the
an
illusion.
illusion.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
because I look back and I'm like, it was about the trauma. Yeah, some of it was about the trauma,
Mm,
but just labeling it as something about control
yeah,
is far too simplistic, and it doesn't
yeah,
acknowledge what it feels like for the person who's experiencing it.
yeah.
Um, and yeah, it feels easier, but it's not, because then you're adding another level onto everything
Mm.
and more to unravel.
There's so many layers to this. It's very rarely straightforward. There's a lot to
Yeah.
explore and a lot to uncover, I would say.
I feel like we've talked about a lot, but one thing I really do want to get in, because I don't think we would be doing our fat friends any justice if we didn't mention this in this episode, that I think restriction can also be massively about safety, because
Hmm.
I think fat phobia plays a huge role in restriction too.
Absolutely.
Whether you are in a fat body, smaller body, straight body, whatever. And I hear this from clients I work with, that the harassment and bullying and abuse that they have received just simply for existing in their
Mm.
bodies, going about their day-to-day activities,
Yeah.
or the judgment and criticism they receive from people for
Hmm.
simply eating in front of other people.
Yeah.
I think we have to acknowledge that for some people, restricting their food intake is about trying to feel like they can feel safer in this world.
Mm.
And I think this affects everyone. Because I talk a lot about fat phobia just in general conversations. And I have had friends or family say, I don't know why you talk about this so much. Like, you're not fat, so why does it bother you? And one, I think that's really ignorant and really privileged to take
Mm.
that stance. But two, it does affect everyone, because
Yeah.
it affects people who are living in larger bodies, because they may restrict or fall into disordered eating patterns to try and not experience those things again and to feel safer, but also for people who are living in smaller bodies. And we see that. That leads us to restrict as well, because we see that discrimination and
Yeah.
don't want to experience it either. So it affects all of us.
I'm really glad you said that.
Understandably, in a different way. Like the experience I have of that is nowhere near in the same way as what
Mm.
a larger person
Yeah.
experiences. Absolutely. So I want to acknowledge the experiences are different, and different levels of severity, but it does still impact us all in some way.
I think we cannot deny that living in a larger body feels very unsafe because of the culture and the society that we live in. It, and I think if you are someone who lives in a larger body, the safest way, as you say, you feel you can exist is if you're actively trying to change that. It's like your obligation. It's expected of you. It's okay for you to be restricting because that's something you have to do.
I've even had like clients and people say to me, actually, they felt if they can show to people that they are restricting, then people treat them differently because
Mm.
they almost are received with more acceptance because it's like you're trying.
You're doing something
Whereas if
about
they,
it.
yeah, whereas if they're not restricting and dieting, then they get more judgment and harassment. And I think I don't know because I don't have the lived experience of being in a larger body, but I can imagine it feels like it's a way of trying to live safer. But actually, I imagine it doesn't really bring true safety because
Mm.
if you're constantly on edge and feeling like you need to maintain, that's not a very comfortable place to be.
Yeah. It's not a secure place to set up camp, is it?
Yeah. I feel like that took quite an angry turn from me there at the end.
No, I like that. I like the emotion.
Get angry. Do you know what? Getting
Yeah.
angry about all of this really has helped me in recovery.
Yeah, same. Yeah. Getting to that angry point where you're like, do you know what? How freaking dare you imply that I can only exist a certain way? Screw you.
Yeah.
No, thank
Like,
you.
and because eating disorder recovery, one of the things I say I think is really hard about eating disorder recovery is you're trying to recover into a world which is almost telling you the things you're doing are
Mm.
right. And you don't have that with other things so as much. And like I know addiction and eating disorder recovery is not the same, but say you are a drug addict and you're going through recovery, like I imagine that's an incredibly difficult thing to
Mm.
do. So I don't want to minimize like how hard that is for people. But you're not living in a world where everybody is saying, actually, do those drugs. It's really good
Yes.
to do those drugs. Whereas
Yes.
in eating disorder recovery, you are battling that as well. You're
Yes. You are. You're going
fighting
against the
against,
tide. Yes, exactly
yes,
that. You are.
exactly.
Yeah.
And I really don't
Yeah.
want to say like that means eating disorder recovery is harder than drug addiction recovery.
No, of course.
It's absolutely not what I'm saying at all. I just want to highlight like that other level that you are experiencing that you
Yes.
might not experience in other
Yes.
things. And likewise, there will be elements in drug addiction recovery that
Yeah.
you don't experience in
Yeah.
eating disorder recovery as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think it's important to acknowledge that. And that's why I think that anger is important because when you get to that point where you're like angry about the messages people have told you and fat phobic messaging just being pushed down your throat, you can
Oh, I
get like,
know. When
do you know
yeah.
what? I'm going to do something different. And then
Yes.
it feels empowering and it actually feels really radical and
Yes.
revolutionary.
It does, because you start to notice it everywhere, don't you?
Mhm.
You start to see things that you didn't used to pay attention to, and you notice comments on TV shows that you've watched 100 times that you're like, did they seriously just say that? It feels so empowering when you get to that point. It did take a while for me to get there, but when you start to see it, you see it through a different lens.
Maybe we should finish it there with the anger
We can
and the
finish it with
let's start a
yeah.
revolution.
let's let's leave everyone with anger today. You're welcome. But as always, we like to know your experience, your lived
Yeah.
experience. It's really important to us.
Yeah. Huge topic. So if you think there is other things, which there definitely will be,
Of
that
course.
contribute towards restriction, mainly, I suppose we're talking mainly about physical restriction here,
Mm.
please drop them in the comments. And also, I think what might be worth us putting in the show notes is some links to accounts of like fat creators because I
Yes.
think that it's important to also hear their experiences because
Agreed.
we can't speak from that lived experience.
Yeah. Good point,
So
Becca.
we'll do that.
Well done. You did good.
Woohoo! We've got another one in the bag. How do we end? What do we do?
We'll just say thanks for listening. See you guys next
Tune
week.
in next week,
Tune in next week for
which we don't know what we'll be talking
we
about
don't know
yet,
what
but
we're talking
we'll.
about yet, but we're going to be talking. Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Okay, bye.